At my dad's funeral, my stepmother announced to everyone that I wasn't his real daughter, expecting to disinherit me completely. She thought she had won everything, but she had no idea that my father had left a final, devastating surprise for her in his will, and the lawyer was about to reveal it. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of polished mahogany and old varnish was the smell of my father. It was the smell of my childhood, of safety, of home. Today, however, that familiar scent, rising from the casket at the front of the room, was an anchor pulling me down into an ocean of grief. Each breath was a struggle, a fresh wave of loss washing over me. The funeral service had been a blur of muted condolences and sympathetic glances. Friends of my father, Arthur, had shared stories of his kindness, his unparalleled skill as a master woodworker, and his quiet integrity. Every word was a beautiful, painful reminder of the man who had been my entire world. Now, at the reception held in our family home, the air was thick with the low murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. I felt like a ghost haunting my own life, drifting through rooms filled with memories. Every corner held a piece of him: the hand-carved mantelpiece, the sturdy oak dining table we were all gathered around, the intricate little bird he'd whittled for me when I was 6, still sitting on the windowsill. My stepmother, Brenda, moved through the crowd with a practiced grace that always set my teeth on edge. Dressed in impeccably tailored black, her grief seemed more a performance than a genuine emotion. She had been married to my father for 6 years, and in that time, she had managed to subtly redecorate the house, replacing the warm, lived-in comfort with a sterile, magazine-ready aesthetic. She tolerated me, but her smiles never quite reached her cold, assessing eyes. She saw me not as a daughter, but as a competitor for my father's attention and, more importantly, his assets. I was standing near the fireplace, clutching a cup of tea I had no intention of drinking, when Brenda tapped a spoon against her wine glass. The gentle chatter in the room subsided, and all eyes turned to her. A small, sad smile played on her lips, the kind she reserved for public displays. "Thank you all for coming today to honor Arthur," she began, her voice smooth and composed. "He was a wonderful man, a pillar of our community, and a loving husband. He built a beautiful life, a beautiful home, a legacy." Her eyes swept the room, landing on me with a flicker of something sharp and predatory. I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. This was not just a thank you speech. This was an announcement. "Arthur valued truth and honesty above all else," she continued, her voice gaining a harder edge. "He believed that secrets were like rot in a piece of wood, weakening the foundation of a family. And in the spirit of that honesty, there is something that must be said. A secret that Arthur, in his boundless kindness, kept for far too long." The room was utterly silent. I could feel the collective gaze shift towards me. My heart began to pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. What was she doing? Brenda took a deep breath, her expression shifting to one of feigned sympathy. "Many of you have known Susan her entire life. You've watched her grow up, believing she was Arthur's daughter." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the words hang in the air. "But the time for secrets is over. The truth is, Arthur was not her biological father." The words hit me like a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I felt the blood drain from my face, and the teacup slipped from my numb fingers, shattering on the stone hearth. The sound was unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. I stared at Brenda, my mind reeling. It couldn't be true. My father was the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who held me when I cried, whose hands, smelling of sawdust and love, had built the very world I stood in. "He took her in as a baby, out of charity," Brenda said, her voice dripping with false pity that was meant to sound like admiration for her late husband. "He was a good man, a saint, really, but he is not and never was her father. Legally, she is a stranger, a guest in this home." The implications of her words crashed down on me. Humiliation, confusion, and a profound sense of betrayal swirled into a nauseating vortex. She wasn't just telling a secret, she was publicly disowning me. She was erasing my entire identity in front of everyone we knew. She was trying to sever my connection to the only parent I had ever known, at the very moment I was mourning his loss. The whispers started around the room, a low, insidious hiss of elation and pity. I looked at her, standing there in her triumph, and a cold, clear thought cut through the fog of my shock and grief. This wasn't about truth. This was about the house, the workshop, the inheritance. This was a calculated, cruel strike designed to leave me with nothing. The pain was immense, a raw, gaping wound where my sense of self used to be. But beneath the pain, a tiny, hard ember of anger began to glow. She had underestimated my father, and she had profoundly underestimated me. The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis that had taken him from us. The moments after Brenda's announcement stretched into an eternity. The air, once filled with respectful sorrow, was now charged with a different kind of energy. Shock, discomfort, and the morbid curiosity of onlookers witnessing a family's implosion. People avoided my eyes, their faces a mixture of pity and awkwardness. The home my father had built, a sanctuary of warmth and love, suddenly felt like a courtroom where I stood accused of a crime I didn't know I had committed. I didn't try to defend myself. What could I say? The conviction in Brenda's voice, the sheer audacity of her public declaration, had planted a seed of doubt that was already taking root in my own mind. Was it possible? Could my entire life, my very identity, be a carefully constructed lie? The world tilted on its axis, and the familiar faces of friends and neighbors became a blur of indistinct features. I turned and fled, pushing through the stunned crowd and escaping to the one place where I always felt safe, my father's workshop. The scent of cedar and oak enveloped me, a ghostly embrace. I ran my hand over the smooth, worn surface of his primary workbench, my fingers tracing the nicks and grooves left by decades of creation. This was where he had taught me to respect the wood, to read its grain, to coax beauty from its raw form. This was where we had spent countless hours, side by side, not just as father and daughter, but as fellow artisans. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed in front of Brenda's audience now streamed freely down my cheeks, soaking the front of my black dress. A few minutes later, the workshop door creaked open. It was Mrs. Gable, our next-door neighbor since I was a child. Her face, usually so cheerful, was etched with concern. She carried a glass of water, which she pressed gently into my hand. "That woman is a viper," she said, her voice a low, angry whisper. "Don't you listen to a word she says, Susan. Your father adored you. You were his whole world, and everyone knew it." Her kindness was a small balm on a gaping wound. I could only nod, unable to form words. After she left, I sank onto a low stool, my mind racing. Brenda's words echoed relentlessly. He is not and never was her father. Legally, she is a stranger. Later that evening, long after the last of the guests had departed, Brenda found me. I was sitting in the dark living room, staring at the empty fireplace. She didn't turn on the lights. She stood in the doorway, a dark silhouette against the hall light. "I know this is difficult for you to hear, Susan," she said, her voice devoid of any real sympathy. "But it was for the best. Secrets are unhealthy." "Why, Brenda?" I asked, my own voice raspy and unfamiliar. "Why would you do that today, of all days?" "Because today marks a new beginning," she replied coolly. "The estate needs to be settled, and it's important that everything is clear from the outset. Arthur was a generous man, but his generosity has its limits. This house, the business, it belongs to his wife, to his family." "I am his family," I whispered, the words feeling fragile and uncertain even to my own ears. She let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Arthur provided for you your whole life. You should be grateful for what you were given. But now it's time to be realistic. You'll need to start making arrangements. I'll give you a week to gather your things." The cold finality of her tone sent a shiver down my spine. She was kicking me out, from the only home I had ever known. A week. Just like that, 32 years of life were being packed up and discarded. As she turned to leave, I felt a flicker of defiance. My father was a meticulous man, a planner. He thought of every angle, every joint, every possible point of weakness in a piece of furniture. It was inconceivable that he wouldn't have planned for his life, for my future with the same precision. An old memory surfaced, a phrase he often used in the workshop when we were faced with a complex project. "The grain of the wood never lies, Susie," he would say, his voice a low rumble. "You just have to know how to read it." The words resonated in my mind now with a new, urgent meaning. Brenda was presenting a smooth, polished surface, but my father had taught me to look deeper, to find the hidden patterns, the underlying truth. I clung to that thought as if it were a lifeline. She saw a smooth, simple and writtens, but my father was more complex than that. He always was. They had forgotten one crucial thing. My father was a master craftsman, and he never built anything without a solid, unshakable foundation. The days following the funeral were a desolate blur of grief and uncertainty. I moved through the house like a trespasser, acutely aware of Brenda's watchful eyes. Every object I touched felt like it no longer belonged to me. The love and warmth that had once filled these rooms had evaporated, replaced by a cold, transactional tension. Brenda was already talking to real estate agents. Her phone calls filled with discussions of market value and staging. Her voice echoing in the home where my father's memory still lingered. My father, Arthur, was the quiet center of my universe. My mother had passed away when I was an infant, and he had raised me on his own. He wasn't a man of grand pronouncements or effusive emotions, but his love was as solid and dependable as the oak trees he sourced for his creations. It was in the way he'd stop whatever he was doing to help me with my homework, the patient way he taught me to use a lathe, turning a rough block of wood into something smooth and beautiful. He celebrated my small triumphs and soothed my childhood fears. His pride in my work as I grew older and developed my own style as a furniture restorer was my greatest motivation. He would examine a piece I'd finished, his calloused fingers tracing the lines, and give a slow, considered nod. "Good work, Susie," he'd say. "You honored the wood." That was his highest praise. We were more than father and daughter. We were partners, sharing a passion that ran deeper than words. His workshop was our shared sanctuary, a place of sawdust, creativity, and mutual respect. He had poured his life into building his business, not for wealth, but for the love of the craft. His name was synonymous with quality and integrity, and he had always told me that one day, the workshop and the legacy would be mine to carry on. Then, 6 years ago, Brenda had entered our lives. She was a consultant of some kind, impeccably dressed and armed with a dazzling smile. My father, who had been alone for so long, was captivated by her. At first, I was happy for him. He deserved companionship. But I quickly grew to distrust the way Brenda looked at our home, her eyes lingering on the antique furniture and the art on the walls with a covetous gleam. She spoke of unlocking the potential of my father's business, suggesting they franchise the name or pivot to mass-produced designs. Arthur would just smile and gently change the subject. She created a subtle wedge between us. Family dinners became formal affairs. She'd interrupt our conversations about work, dismissing them as shop talk. She insisted on lavish vacations that took my father away from the workshop for weeks at a time, something he had never done before. He seemed happy, if a little more tired, and I didn't want to tarnish that, so I kept my misgivings to myself. I retreated further into the world of the workshop, pouring my energy into restoring pieces, finding solace in bringing old, neglected things back to life. Brenda's cruelty at the funeral was not a spontaneous act of honesty. It was the culmination of a 6-year strategy. She had been waiting for the moment when my father was no longer there to protect me. Her claims about my parentage were designed not just to hurt me, but to sever me from the very foundation of my life, my father's legacy. She wanted to erase my history, and in doing so, secure her financial future. I spent hours in the workshop trying to find my footing. My hands, usually so steady, trembled as I tried to work. My father's tools lay on the benches, silent and waiting. His leather apron hung on a hook by the door. Everything was a reminder of him and of the gaping hole Brenda had torn in my life. The phrase kept circling in my head, "The grain of the wood never lies." Brenda was all surface gloss, a cheap veneer hiding something rotten underneath. My father had built his life, and my life, with care and intention. There had to be something more, a truth hidden beneath the ugly surface of Brenda's lies. She thought this was a simple matter of biology, but my relationship with my father was forged not in blood, but in love, sawdust, and shared creation. And that was a bond she could never understand or break. The week Brenda had given me was ticking away. Each day, her presence in the house grew more oppressive. She had started packing away my father's personal belongings into sterile plastic tubs, her movements efficient and devoid of sentiment. The home was being systematically erased of his essence, and by extension, mine. The grief was still a raw, open wound, but the initial shock was beginning to recede, replaced by a cold, hardening resolve. I would not let this woman dismantle my father's world and cast me out without a fight. The passive victim had to disappear, a strategist had to take her place. My turning point came on the third day. I was in the workshop, sorting through a stack of old design sketches when I found a small, locked box tucked away on a high shelf. It was a beautiful thing, made of bird's-eye maple with intricate dovetail joints, my father's signature style. I recognized it as a box he had made years ago, but I had never known what it contained. There was no key. For a moment, I felt a pang of frustration, but then I remembered something else he had taught me. Every problem has a solution, Susie. Sometimes you just have to look at it from a different angle. I examined the box, running my fingers over its flawless surface. I noticed a tiny, almost invisible imperfection in the grain on one side. Pressing it gently, I heard a soft click. A hidden compartment slid open, revealing not a key for the main lock, but a single, folded piece of paper. On it was a phone number and a name, Mr. David Chen, attorney at law. Below it, in my father's familiar handwriting, was a short note. If you ever need the truth, start here. He knows the whole story. A surge of adrenaline shot through me. This was it. This was the first step my father had laid out for me. My hands shook as I dialed the number. Mr. Chen's voice was calm and professional. I introduced myself, and there was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "Ah, Susan," he said, his tones softening with recognition. "I've been expecting your call. Your father told me you would know when it was time. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" The next day, I sat in Mr. Chen's quiet, book-lined office. He was a kind-faced man in his late 60s, with eyes that held a gentle wisdom. He had been my father's lawyer and friend for over 30 years. "I was at the service, Susan," he said softly. "I heard what Brenda said. It was a despicable act." My eyes filled with tears. "Is it true, Mr. Chen? Was he not my father?" Mr. Chen leaned forward, his expression serious. "Biologically, no, but in every other sense of the word, legally, emotionally, spiritually, Arthur was your father, and he made certain the law would recognize it as such." He then told me the story. My biological father was Arthur's best friend from childhood, a man named Michael. He and my mother had a brief, intense relationship. Tragically, my mother died from complications during childbirth, and Michael, devastated and overwhelmed, passed away in a car accident just 2 months later. Arthur, who had loved my mother as a friend and his best friend Michael like a brother, was named my guardian. "He didn't just become your guardian, Susan," Mr. Chen explained, pulling a thick file from his desk. "On the day you were born, he started the legal process. Before you were a year old, he had formally and legally adopted you. You are his daughter. His name is on your birth certificate. It is an ironclad legal fact." The relief that washed over me was so profound it almost buckled me. I was his daughter, legally, undeniably. "Brenda doesn't know this," I asked. "Arthur never told her the specifics," Mr. Chen said. "He knew her character. He suspected she might one day try to use the truth of your biology against you. He told her just enough to make her think she had found a weakness, a loophole." My father had set a trap. He had laid it out years ago with the same patience and foresight he used to craft a piece of furniture. Brenda had walked right into it. "Your father was a brilliant man, Susan," Mr. Chen continued. "He knew that a legal document alone might not be enough to stop a woman like Brenda from causing trouble, so he built a failsafe into his will." He paused, looking at me intently. "The will has not been read yet. Brenda has been petitioning for an expedited reading, which I have scheduled for this Friday. She believes it will be her coronation. She is in for a significant surprise. He wouldn't tell me the exact details of the will, saying it was best revealed at the official reading. But he gave me a task. Brenda has been managing your father's finances for the past few years. Your father trusted her, perhaps too much. If she is capable of such public cruelty, she is capable of other deceptions. It would be wise to know exactly what she has been doing. I left his office with a newfound sense of purpose. The grief was still there, but now it was forged with steel. My father hadn't abandoned me, he had armed me. I was not just fighting for my home, I was fighting to protect his legacy from the woman who sought to destroy it. The investigation had begun. I was no longer just a restorer of furniture. I was about to become a restorer of truth. Armed with the knowledge of my legal adoption and the hint of my father's foresight, I spent the next 2 days in a flurry of quiet investigation. Mr. Chen had provided me with the name of a discreet forensic accountant, and together we began to look into financial records Brenda had managed since she married my father. My role was to gather any statements and documents I could find in my father's home office, a room Brenda had largely ignored, deeming it cluttered and old-fashioned. It didn't take long to find discrepancies. My father had been a man of simple tastes and careful habits, yet in the last few years, there were significant, regular cash withdrawals and credit card charges for luxury goods I knew he would never have purchased. There were payments to a design consultancy firm that, after a quick search, I discovered was a shell company registered to an address that didn't exist. The trail was messy, but the direction was clear. Brenda had been siphoning money from my father's accounts for years. The evening before the will reading, I decided it was time for the first confrontation. I needed to see her reaction, to rattle her confidence before she walked into Mr. Chen's office, so certain of her victory. I found her in the kitchen, on the phone with a caterer, planning some sort of post-will reading celebration. Her voice was bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to the funereal atmosphere she had maintained for the past week. She ended the call as I entered, her smile vanishing as she saw me. "Susan," she said, her tone clipped, "I hope you're nearly finished packing. The movers I've hired are coming on Saturday." "I've been going through some of Dad's old paperwork in the office," I began, my voice deliberately calm and even. I placed a stack of bank statements on the polished granite countertop between us. "I found these. I was just trying to make sense of his finances. There are a few things I don't understand." Brenda's eyes darted to the papers, a flicker of apprehension in her gaze. "That's all my responsibility now. You don't need to worry yourself with it." "I'm not worried, just curious," I said, sliding one statement towards her. I had circled a recurring payment. "This company, Opulent Interiors. Dad was paying them $10,000 a month for the last 2 years. I don't remember him ever mentioning them. What kind of consulting did they do?" Brenda stiffened. She picked up the paper, her knuckles white. "That was a private business arrangement. It's none of your concern." "It just seems strange," I pressed on, my heart pounding but my voice steady. "A company with no website, no listed phone number, and a registered address that's a vacant lot. It's almost as if it doesn't exist." Her face paled. For the first time since the funeral, the mask of composed superiority slipped, revealing a flash of pure panic. "You have no right to go snooping through our private affairs." "Our affairs, or your affairs?" I countered softly. "I also found records of a previous marriage you never mentioned to Dad, in Nevada. It seems the divorce wasn't finalized until 6 months after you and Dad were married. That's a rather significant detail to omit, isn't it?" This was a piece of information the accountant's background check had uncovered. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the depth of her deception. Brenda's composure shattered completely. Her face twisted into a snarl of fury. "You insolent little girl, you think you've found something clever? It doesn't matter. None of it matters. You are nothing. A charity case. Tomorrow, at 10 o'clock, everyone will know that you have no claim to any of this." Arthur's will is going to confirm what I've already told everyone. Now get out of my sight." She snatched the papers from the counter and stormed out of the room. Her reaction was everything I needed to see. The lies were poorly constructed, her threats hollow. She was lashing out because she was scared. She had built her entire plan on one single secret, my parentage, believing it was her trump card. She had no idea that my father, and now I, held the entire deck. The smug confidence she wore like a shield was cracking, and tomorrow, at the will reading, I knew it would be broken completely. My father had taught me that the strength of a structure lies in its hidden joints. Brenda's structure was about to collapse. Brenda's panic manifested as renewed aggression. The morning of the will reading, she was a storm of passive-aggressive activity. She had the movers she'd mentioned call me to confirm a pickup time for my belongings on Saturday, ensuring I overheard the conversation. She spoke loudly on the phone to one of her friends, complaining about the unpleasantness of having to deal with Arthur's lingering charity case, and how she couldn't wait to have the house to herself to finally cleanse the energy. Every action was designed to reinforce her narrative and to break my spirit before we even arrived at the lawyer's office. But her efforts had the opposite effect. With each petty jab, my resolve hardened. I was no longer just Susan, the grieving daughter. I was the custodian of my father's final plan, the execut, or of a quiet justice he had engineered years in advance. I spent the morning in the workshop, not working, but simply being in his space, drawing strength from the familiar scents and textures. I thought about the depth of his love, a love so profound that he had anticipated this very betrayal and built a fortress around me to protect me from it, even after he was gone. Meanwhile, Mr. Chen and the forensic accountant had worked through the night. The picture they painted was even more damning than I had imagined. Brenda's deception was not a series of small, opportunistic thefts. It was a systematic, long-term campaign to drain my father's assets. She had forged his signature on documents to liquidate stock portfolios, transferring the funds to offshore accounts. The shell company was just the tip of the iceberg. She had been slowly bleeding his legacy dry, all while playing the part of the devoted wife. The accountant had prepared a thick, detailed report, complete with copies of bank records and forged documents. It was irrefutable proof. My phone rang an hour before we were due to leave. It was my Aunt Carol, my father's sister. Her voice was hesitant. "Susan, dear, Brenda called me this morning," she said, sounding troubled. "She said some things about you, about your father. She said you were making baseless accusations to try and get money you're not entitled to." My heart sank. Brenda was trying to poison the family against me, to isolate me completely. "Aunt Carol," I said, my voice firm but calm, "all I ask is that you keep an open mind until after the will is read. Things are not what they seem." I arrived at Mr. Chen's office a few minutes early. He greeted me with a reassuring nod and handed me a file. It was a copy of my official, sealed adoption certificate, along with my birth certificate listing Arthur as my father. "Just in case," he said simply. Brenda arrived precisely on time, dressed in a sharp, dark gray suit, looking every bit the grieving but powerful widow. She gave me a dismissive glance and took her seat at the large conference table, placing her expensive leather handbag down with a confident thud. She looked directly at Mr. Chen. "Shall we begin?" she asked, a smug smile playing on her lips. "I do have a lunch reservation at 1. Mr. Chen calmly put on his reading glasses and opened the large, leather-bound folder in front of him. "This is the last will and testament of Arthur Miller," he began, his voice filling the quiet room. He went through the preliminary bequests, donations to the local craftsmen's guild, gifts to a few old friends, a generous sum for Aunt Carol. With each item read, Brenda's smile grew wider. This was all just the opening act for the main event, her inheritance of the entire estate. "Now," Mr. Chen said, looking up over his glasses, "we come to the matter of the primary estate, including the family home, the workshop, all financial accounts, and the business itself." Brenda leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with anticipation. This was her moment of triumph. "Before I read that clause," Mr. Chen said, His gaze shifting to me and then back to Brenda, Arthur felt it was important to clarify the definition of his family. He has included a specific preamble. He cleared his throat and read, "I, Arthur Miller, declare for the record that my sole issue and only child is my beloved daughter, Susan Miller. She was, from the moment I first held her, and is now, in every sense of the word, my daughter. Her place in my life, and in my legacy, is absolute and unconditional." Brenda let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "That's a lovely sentiment, David, but it's emotionally driven and legally meaningless. As I have already made clear, she is not his biological child. Her claim is invalid." Mr. Chen held up a hand. "Allow me to finish, Brenda." He turned the page. "We now come to the final and most significant clause of the will. It is an interim clause, also known as a no-contest clause." Brenda's smile faltered. "A what?" "It states," Mr. Chen continued, his voice clear and steady, "should any beneficiary of this will, directly or indirectly, in any forum, challenge or contest the validity of this will or any of its provisions, or attempt to dispute the status of my daughter, Susan Miller, as my rightful heir for any reason whatsoever, then any and all provisions for that beneficiary shall be revoked. Their share will be considered forfeit and will be absorbed into the residual estate, which passes in its entirety to my daughter, Susan Miller." The room fell into a profound, echoing silence. Brenda stared at him, her face a mask of disbelief. The color drained from her cheeks. What does that mean?" she stammered. Mr. Chen looked at her, his expression unreadable. "It means, Brenda, that by publicly announcing at your husband's funeral that Susan was not his daughter in an attempt to disinherit her, you have, in fact, triggered this exact CT clause, you have contested her status as his heir, and in doing so, you have disinherited yourself, completely." The weight of Mr. Chen's words settled over the conference room, thick and suffocating. Brenda's face cycled through a series of emotions: confusion, denial, and finally, a surge of incandescent rage. Her carefully constructed facade of the grieving widow crumbled into dust, revealing the grasping, furious woman beneath. "This is absurd," she shrieked, slamming her hand on the polished mahogany table. The sound echoed in the silent room. "You can't be serious. He wouldn't do that. I was his wife." "He was also a father," Mr. Chen replied, his voice remaining perfectly level. "And a very thorough man. He anticipated this exact scenario, Brenda. He wanted to protect Susan from the very cruelty you displayed." "This is a trick, you and her," she spat, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You've conspired against me. This document is a forgery. I will sue you. I will sue everyone." I remained silent, watching her. There was no triumph in me, only a profound sadness for my father, who had known he had to go to such lengths to protect me from the woman he had married. I felt a quiet strength settle over me, the strength he had instilled in me. Mr. Chen calmly reached into his briefcase and produced another set of documents. It was the forensic accountant's report. He slid it across the table towards her. "Before you make any further accusations, Brenda, you should be aware that we have a full accounting of the funds you have been embezzling from your husband's accounts for the past 4 years," he said coolly. "The shell company, the offshore transfers, the forged signatures. The district attorney's office might be very interested in this evidence, especially when they learn you have been left with no legitimate inheritance to pay for a legal defense." Brenda stared at the thick report as if it were a venomous snake. Her breath came in ragged gasps. The fight drained out of her, replaced by a desperate, cornered fear. She had lost, not just the inheritance, but everything. Her entire scheme had unraveled, pulling her down with it. She slowly raised her eyes to meet mine. They were filled not with remorse, but with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You," she whispered, her voice venomous. "You were always a little parasite, clinging to him. He should have left you at the orphanage." Before I could respond, Mr. Chen stood up, his presence commanding the room. "That is quite enough. Brenda, your business here is concluded. As of this moment, you are no longer the executor of Arthur's estate. You are no longer a beneficiary. You are also no longer a resident of his home. I have a court order here instructing you to vacate the premises within 48 hours, taking only your personal belongings with you. A sheriff will be there to oversee the process." He placed the order on the table beside the accountant's report. It was the final, definitive blow. Brenda stared at the papers, her face ashen. The polished, powerful woman who had walked in an hour earlier was gone. In her place was a diminished, defeated figure. Without another word, she grabbed her handbag, rose unsteadily to her feet, and walked out of the room, not with a bang, but with a whimper of utter and total defeat. When the door clicked shut behind her, the tension in the room finally broke. I let out a long, shaky breath I didn't realize I had been holding. Mr. Chen came around the table and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "He loved you very much, Susan," he said softly. "He was so proud of the woman you became. He just wanted to be sure you would always be safe." Tears streamed down my face, but for the first time in over a week, they were not tears of grief or pain. They were tears of relief, of gratitude, of overwhelming love for the father who had protected me one last time. He had left me more than a home and a workshop. He had left me a testament to his love, an unshakable foundation on which to rebuild my life. The showdown was over. The truth, like the grain in a perfect piece of wood, had finally been revealed. The 2 days following the will reading were surreal. As promised, a sheriff's deputy arrived at the house the next morning to supervise Brenda as she packed her things. She was silent and sullen, refusing to look at me. Watching her load boxes of designer clothes and expensive trinkets into her car, I felt a strange sense of detachment. She was just a person now, stripped of her power and her pretense. The house seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief as her car pulled out of the driveway for the last time. The cold, sterile atmosphere she had cultivated began to dissipate almost immediately, as if the very walls were exhaling. Mr. Chen handled the legal fallout with quiet efficiency. Faced with the overwhelming evidence of fraud and embezzlement, Brenda's lawyers advised her to cooperate and agree. NT was reached where she would return a significant portion of the stolen funds in exchange for the estate not pressing criminal charges. It wasn't about revenge for me. It was about restoring what she had taken from my father's legacy. She was left financially ruined and socially exiled. The friends who had flocked to her side quickly abandoned her once the story of her deception became known. Her downfall was as swift as it was complete. With the house finally quiet, I began the slow process of reclaiming it. I packed away the cold, modern furniture Brenda had bought and brought my father's old, comfortable armchair back to its rightful place by the fireplace. I put his tools back in their proper order in the workshop. Each act was a small ritual of healing, of restoring the home to the sanctuary it had always been. A week later, Mr. Chen called me back to his office. He had one last thing my father had left for me. It was a letter, sealed in an envelope with my name on it in his familiar, steady script. My hands trembled as I opened it. "My dearest Susie," it began. "If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and I am so sorry I had to leave you. It also likely means that Brenda has shown her true colors, and the truth of your birth has come out. I am sorry for the pain that must have caused you, and for the secret I kept for so long. I want you to know the whole story. Your mother, Eleanor, was a wonderful woman, and your father, Michael, was my best friend in the world. When they were gone, my heart was broken. But then there was you. The moment they placed you in my arms, a tiny, perfect miracle, you healed a part of me I thought was lost forever. You were not an obligation, Susan, you were a gift. Raising you was the greatest joy and privilege of my life. I chose to be your father every single day, and I would not have changed a moment of it. Biology doesn't make a family, love does. I told you the basics of your adoption so that if you ever wanted to know more about Michael and Eleanor, you could. They were good people, and you have their strength in you. But I am the one who got to be your dad. I got to watch you grow, to teach you our craft, to see you become the incredible, talented, and kind woman you are. That makes me the luckiest man in the world. The workshop, the house, it's all just wood and stone. The real legacy is you. Carry on the work. Honor the wood. And know that I love you always." I finished the letter, tears blurring the words. All the lingering questions, the last vestiges of doubt, washed away. I was the daughter of 3 loving parents. Arthur had not erased my origins, he had protected them, and he had built my life upon a foundation of unwavering love. In the months that followed, I poured my heart back into the workshop. I took over my father's business, not just restoring furniture, but creating my own pieces, my designs infused with everything he had taught me. The scent of mahogany and varnish was once again the smell of comfort, of purpose, of home. I found peace in the steady work of my hands, and I felt his presence in every piece I completed. Brenda had tried to steal my inheritance, but my true inheritance was never the money or the property. It was the love, the skills, and the integrity my father had given me, a legacy no one could ever take away.